I can still remember when Dig Dug hit my local arcade in the early 1980s. What's not to love about digging tunnels, finding vegetables, and overinflating monsters until they explode? When Arcade1Up announced its Pac-Man 14-in-1 Legacy cabinet skinned for Dig Dug, I knew I just had to have one, particularly since it included other games not yet in my collection such as Galaga, Pac-Man, Rolling Thunder, and Rompers. Despite my overcrowded arcade and my wife's mild protests, I bought one on Walmart's $2.99 Christmas sale. While I was at it, I picked up a few mod parts for it and installed them while building the cabinet, which can be a real time saver. Most of the 4 modifications shown here are also appear in my other videos, but I made this one because I encountered a couple of surprises along the way. And if Dig Dug is your first mod project, it's nice to have all the techniques in one place. And for those looking to upgrade the marquee, that's going to be a video for another day when I can afford a replacement from Zabo's Arcades. I have to admit that of all my Arcade1Up cabinets, Dig Dug is a toss-up with X-Men for worst washed out marquee ever. I'll likely make the swap at some point in the future. I started the modifications by lighting the coin door buttons with the 2-slot LED kit from Retro 530. The kit comes with LEDs and a wiring harness that taps power from the Arcade1Up USB port on the back of the monitor. You can do this installation after your cabinet is built, but it's far easier before the coin door is mounted to the kick plate. To begin, I removed the 4 screws that hold the 2 red button assemblies to the back of the molded coin door and then the buttons themselves. I placed the coin door in its mounting holes on the kick plate. Next, I marked the approximate center of the buttons for placement of the LEDs. I used a small drill bit to make pilot holes on these centering points, then used a 3/8" bit to make exact sized holes for the LEDs. I drilled halfway through one side of the plate first. Next, I flipped the board over and drilled the rest of the way from the back. After wiping off all the dust with a damp paper towel, I tested the LEDs in the holes. They were a snug fit, which is exactly what I wanted. I then reinserted the buttons in the molded coin door and attached it to the kick plate with the enclosed mounting hardware. Once the kick plate was in the cabinet, I installed the LEDs in the holes. After the cabinet was assembled, I connected the USB plug to the monitor and flipped on the power to test the LEDs. As you can see, one didn't light. LEDs are polarity sensitive and they'll only work one way. While the kit comes pre-wired by Retro 530, the LEDs themselves are press fit into their mounts. It was easy to correct simply by removing the LED, turning it 180 degrees, and plugging it back in properly. Speaking of LEDs, I added LED buttons to 2 machines now, and I really like how they look, so I determined that Dig Dug was going to get the same treatment from the start. The game already comes with 2 LED Volcano player selection buttons, so I left those alone. I'd used Retro 530's LED 3-button kit on my Ms. Pac-Man game, so I contacted the owner and asked if he'd do a custom 4-button kit for me. I already had a red LED I wanted to use for the attack button on Dig Dug, so for a small fee, Retro 530 simply added a 4th set of power leads to the wiring harness. The button kit includes 1 yellow and 2 white LED push buttons, plus the wiring harness and a splitter to tap into the marquee's 5-volt power supply on the cabinet. I started by removing the deck from the cabinet and the plastic cover that protects the wiring. After taking a photograph of the wiring for reference to put it all back together later, I removed the leads to the 4 regular push buttons and then the push buttons themselves. Simply press the tabs on the side of the button to release it from the control deck and then press downward to push it through the hole. The new buttons are a bit smaller than the openings, but they attach firmly using screw-on locking collars. These buttons come with a plastic protective film that covers the plunger. Be sure to peel it away when installing them. There are 4 connecting tabs on the new buttons. The 2 outer tabs, marked plus and minus, power the LED. The 2 positioned closer to the middle are for the switch. I carefully reconnected the switch wires to the leads on all 4 buttons. The 2 wires can be connected to either post on the switch, so it doesn't really matter. Before going much farther, I plugged the splitter into the marquee power socket on the back of the display screen, then attached the wiring harness to the splitter. I also reconnected the ribbon cable to the control deck and then powered up the cabinet. The LED power harness has yellow and black wires. I used the yellow LED as a test and plugged the wires into its power leads until I got a combination that caused the LED to light. On my harness, the yellow wires attached to the positive contact tabs. With the test complete, I turned the system off, then returned the deck to the workbench and finished the wiring connections. I also drilled a large hole in the plastic cover so I could thread the power cable through it. I then reattached the cover to the deck and put it back into the game cabinet. It wasn't until I'd played the game for a bit that I decided to upgrade the spring and the joystick. Arcade1Up typically uses 1 to 2 pound tension springs in its joysticks, and while that's okay from the start, they can wear out over time and get looser. I like more positive control, and I find the stock springs to be a bit sloppy, so I ordered a replacement 4-pound tension spring from eBay seller Best Deals, free shipping. To install the spring, you need to access the bottom of the joystick, which means removing the cover from the control deck yet again. To replace the spring, first remove the C-clip that holds the stick assembly together. I used a small screwdriver to dislodge the clip. Be careful here, as the assembly literally is spring-loaded and can fly apart when released. Also be aware that if it's not supported, the joystick handle will fall out once the clip is released. I left the deck resting on my workbench to keep the handle in place. If it does fall out, be aware that there are 2 white pieces that fit along either side of the mounting plate. Be sure to get them into the correct order as shown in the photo. Next, I removed the old spring, dropped in the new one, and slipped the white cover over it. I then replaced the C-clip back in its groove on the stick and pressed it in until it clicked into place. With the new spring locked in the socket, I tested the joystick to make sure it worked properly, then replaced the plastic cover and reinstalled the deck in the machine. The final modification is the reason why I call this 3.5 mods. That's because I installed it, and then I decided to uninstall it for now, pending some further modification. Being 6 foot tall, I find the control placement of Arcade1Up cabinets too low to play comfortably for long periods of time. I've elevated all of my cabinets using 4-inch riser boosters from Buy Stuff Arcades. These are custom-made wood extensions that slot into the bottom of standard Arcade1Up riser bases, providing better height for me as well as a clean, sleek appearance. Dig Dug is the first arcade cabinet in my collection using the firm's new 2-piece side panel design. The deck height of the machine when resting on its base is 38.5 inches. By comparisons, my Simpsons cabinet with its 4-inch extension sits just over 42 inches. So to bring Dig Dug up to spec, I ordered a 4-inch booster for it. The riser booster comes in 4 pieces, factory finished in black. Before assembly, I drilled holes in the mounting post to screw it to the cabinet's base. I built the base following the instructions. It assembles easily with 4 black drywall screws. You can simply slip the booster directly under the game's riser base and leave it as is. However, I tend to move my games around the arcade a lot, so having the booster as a separate piece can cause problems. As such, I screwed the extension to the base. Before doing so, I removed the plastic feet from the game's riser. If left in place, they create a gap between the 2 pieces, and I think a smooth connection looks better. The feet are simply nailed to the bottom of the base's panels and are easily removed with a pair of pliers. To screw the extension to the base, I removed the front and back riser panels. I next drove 1-inch wood screws through the extension's posts into the sides of the base. I then replaced the front and back panels and attached the now taller base to the game cabinet. As shown here, the riser elevated the deck as planned, bringing it up almost 43 inches at the front. However, one thing I had not accounted for on this cabinet is it has a sloped deck, and that extra 4-inch of riser has actually made it almost too tall at the back, particularly when sitting on a stool to play the game. Really, a 2-inch riser would be perfect for this application, and I've contacted Buy Stuff Arcades to see if they'd make a custom riser for me. In the meantime, the 4-inch riser is temporarily supporting my Defender cabinet until I sell it. While I would have enjoyed Dig Dug straight out of the box, I'm very pleased with the modifications I've made, including the lights, LEDs, and the heavier joystick spring. And while I need to work out the height issue, it plays very comfortably when sitting on its matching Dig Dug stool, earning it a coveted spot inside my small arcade. All of these modifications are easy to do. Each takes less than an hour to complete and can be applied to a variety of Arcade1Up cabinets. For more modification videos, check out my YouTube channel, Pop Art Studios, and watch for more mod projects in the coming months.